try it. And it typed out a really nice letter for me that I wanted to write to someone. And it was, fantastic. It was so well written. It was emotional, and it hit all the right notes. And then I asked it to write a column for me. So it really messed that up, because it had all its facts wrong, and sort of really screwed things up, to put it mildly. So therefore, it kind of gave me the sense that ChatGPT isn't quite there with everything. It's interesting, it's exciting, but it's also scary. It's a scary new world for all of us. So I thought it would be good to talk to the experts today about whether we are ready for artificial intelligence. What's the good? What's the bad? Does it need regulation? How should we approach it from here onwards? Well, Apar Gupta, the co-founder and director of the Internet Freedom Foundation, is with us. It's really great to have him. He's someone who writes extensively on issues related to our digital world and privacy issues, etc. We'll be joined by Mishi Chaudhary. She's a senior digital rights lawyer, Senior Vice President and General Counsel with Virtue, and she's joining us from the States in just a couple of minutes. So, Apar Gupta, you're here. Great to have you here. Let me just begin with a very simple question. Is AI good or bad, in your view?
I think AI by itself holds the promise of good. It's a technology which applies, it's a bundle of technologies actually. So what we are terming as artificial intelligence more often than not in the press and the media, or which has piqued social interest in India at least, has been the deployment of ChatGPT, which is a large language model-based artificial intelligence, which is called general purpose. So you can use it, for instance, as you narrated, writing something which is thoughtful and heartfelt. But it can also be used to undertake coding, to check grammar for people who are not able to do that. For instance, it's used for people to draw up personal plans. There is a very wide range of use which ChatGPT can be put to. So it's general purpose, but it's language based. And the point I'm trying to make here is that we have had another type of artificial intelligence which has also been deployed in India for a large period of time, if we think about it. And those are facial recognition technologies. Facial recognition technologies and their encounter for the general Indian public has more often than not been at a airport, especially for the much more affluent metropolitan classes, in which their face is matched against a previous image which they uploaded. However, for that match identification to happen on an airport or even on your own phone or your digital devices, there is a large number of images which have been used to create that level of identification. Now, while ChatGPT may seem as fairly benign, facial recognition by itself may be deployed towards all kinds of uses, which may include law enforcement, for identifying suspects, as has been done by the Delhi police, or it may also be used towards ascertaining the identity of a voter when they are participating in state elections, as has been done in Telangana. This poses risks of discrimination, exclusion, faulty matches, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to make in my opening intervention is that AI is not one technology, it is a bundle of technologies, and they present very, very different impacts for individuals and groups. And this will be also very different for people in India, given a large number of people don't have access to the internet, leave alone having the ability, digital literacy to access AI-based services. So with that, I'll just pause here.
A good overall perspective from you, Apar Gupta. I just wanted to apologize that Nikhil Pava couldn't be here last minute because of a personal emergency. So we wish Nikhil well and hope everything's okay. Mishi Chaudhary, great to have you. I introduced you just before you came on. It's so nice of you to join us this evening. I was telling Apar Gupta and our participants before that my experience with ChatGPT, which was a lovely heartfelt letter that it wrote for me, which really worked well. And then I asked it to write a political column for me, which it really messed up, got all its facts wrong. Although the construction of sentences was really good. But I was just asking Apar, just an opening question, which I wanted to ask you as well. Is AI good or bad? Are you excited by it or are you scared of it?
Well, thank you for having me. And I apologize. I have never participated in a tech conference or a panel where technology has not failed me. So that happened today as well. And sorry for joining late, but now that we are here,
No worries.
I like binary questions. Computers are binary things. However, they fail to do just basic math. That's why decimal numbers are different. And that's why I don't know whether I am scared of it or I'm excited about it. I think mostly the approach is new tech is always exciting. And but what impact it has and how the humanity uses it, that raises a bunch of questions. So as always, it's us humans who are the source of good and bad or the issues here. So these days, of course, at least large language models, which are being widely discussed under the rubric of artificial intelligence. I'm not sure that actually is artificial intelligence, but we all have been shocked about how much they managed to sound like people, like you said in your letter. But of course, the political column didn't turn out to be what it was supposed to do the job. And that does and that does raise pretty much the red flag which people would start talking about, in fact. Some harm which is tangible and which we can see right away. I think it's a good bet that the current language models and their successors will take over a significant number of tasks that are already being done by human beings. A first draft is always easy for anybody else to edit. So they'll create those first drafts, etc. There would be a lot of, at least in my world where I help engineers and coders write code, they're also telling how documentation is becoming easier, commentary is becoming easier. So, but what I think is like previous leaps in technology, it will make economy more productive, but it also will hurt some workers whose skills are being devalued right now. And how large these effects will be, or how quickly they are going to come about to be, nobody really knows the answer to the first question, because predictions about what technology is going to do on economy are highly unreliable and notoriously, in fact. A few years ago, crypto was everything. Then we all wanted only to talk about metaverse. Self-driving cars are great. Yeah, so on impact of technology, they are notoriously unreliable. However, I must also point out that large economic effects from AI will take a little longer to materialize than we currently seem to expect. So for now, efficiency is something which we can definitely expect from these models. So they will transform many occupations. And the right approach seems to be, when faced with such transformative tech, is to figure out how to use for our betterment and also slow down, because there are a lot of developments that are happening which nobody knows. Like scientists who work on it, there's an input, and then something happens in the middle in these large models, whether it is generative or other kind of AI, which we are calling, and then there's an output. But what happens in the middle is still a black hole. That's why you're seeing the pause letter, the warnings by Jeffrey Hinton. Or
I was coming to that. In fact, I mean, just to let our participants know, Jeffrey Hinton is widely considered as the father of artificial intelligence technology. He recently quit Google, though he's in his mid-70s, so maybe age was a factor as well. But he has said that the AI chatbots, I'm quoting him, are quite scary. He told the BBC that they could become more intelligent than humans, could be exploited by bad actors. He says it's able to produce lots of text automatically, so you get very effective spam bots, and it will allow authoritarian leaders to manipulate their electorate, amongst other things. So Apar Gupta, I mean, when this is coming from the man who, in a sense, pioneered this kind of technology, should we not be a little more worried about it?
I think what may be rise to alarm much more recently from the gentleman who you referred has been highlighted and raised by people who were working much earlier than Google and have to actually leave their jobs. And in fact, that includes a great paper which has been written by Timnit Gibru, Emily Bender, Angelina, and Margaret Smitchell. So it's called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. Can large language models be too big? And they outline about 4 risks in that, and I'll just quickly take you through that. The first is the amount of computing power which is itself needed to, let's say, scrape the internet, read, feed text into all those books, etc., and then essentially come up with the kind of training data, scrape it, and make this model by itself, is a large amount of computing resources. So there are environmental and financial costs to it, and that's been one prong of their critique. The other things are that the massive data which is being gathered quite often from the internet, which is why you do have humans who are then moderating boundaries which are put in Chat GPT, and still the outputs sometimes being racist, sexist, and overcoming those barriers. And like in terms of much more deeper critiques in terms of what does it do to tech power, or big tech in a sense. There's a recent report by the AI Now Institute, which has done a landscape, and it basically says that these will be controlled by big tech by itself. So in a way, it will perpetuate the kind of market forces which we have seen earlier. It will have present concerns around discrimination, privacy, security vulnerabilities, and negative environmental impacts. Which is why I think so, as much as there is euphoria, and we do look forward to utilizing it in our own use and manner and form, even its clunky way, it seems to be endearing, we need to ask ourselves these deeper questions to be prepared. One other thing, which is a much more deeper moral question, is that quite often people's use of ChatGPT is not only for functional and productivity-based uses that do this or do that. Quite often people are also approaching ChatGPT from a much more conceptual or imaginative framework, which means that they are looking at it for essentially writing the first draft, writing the outline of an article by itself. And there I fear that it may lead to a much more stunting of creativity, of learning by itself, skill-based application at certain ages. The problem is essentially that it is a photocopy of a photocopy, and we do know that after there are enough photocopies, because ChatGPT gives you something, you put it out of the world, ChatGPT learns from it, and that's a cycle which is a boundary in terms of human thought and imagination, I think will present itself as a challenge in the much more creative industries. But I may be wrong there, but this is on the basis of what I've read.
Mr. Chaudhary, just, on this issue of I wanted to sort of break it up into some of the issues that Apar Gupta raised, and looking first at jobs, then ethical issues, regulation, etc., all of that. On jobs, and you touched upon that as well. How concerned are you that, we are potentially, not just people in the tech industry, but other industries as well, should they worry that, AI is going to take their jobs away? There was a terrific piece that DW News did from Germany last week about, an Indian news channel creating a TV anchor bot, which frankly I thought was more objective than the current lot of TV anchors, but that apart, just asking all of us what we thought about that. I was a little concerned by that. What do you think in terms of job displacement, etc., where we're going with this?
So I think that each time we have made developments in some kind of technology, what has happened, it has definitely replaced some skilled workers. The original Luddites, now that term is used as people who want to resist adoption of technology, but they were really skilled artisans. And they knew the fact that a new tech comes and is going to replace them. So they're resistant to adoption of new tech. One can understand, because anybody's job is threatened, they are going to be a little resistive. So I'm going to say that at least the current models as they are looking for, and because also there has been very large scale adoption of this particular ChatGPT, which is only going to be creating content, the feeling seems to be many of these jobs are going to be taken away. I will say that some of them are going to go away for sure. However, different skills are going to be now more valued. If you see what OpenAI was also doing is outsourcing a lot of the work in terms of understanding the output which they were giving was not illegal. It had none of the usual objective stuff like uh, CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material, etc. And these jobs were going to Kenya. But these were such hard jobs because people had to look at a lot of text as well as images, etc., in order to wean out what can or cannot be available. The company actually stopped everything after 9 months because mental health was being impacted. So to your question about what industries are we going to see some things in, there will be definitely changes. However, whether it's going to be a whole-scale displacement of jobs, etc., I think we're going a little ahead of ourselves. That's not happening in the next few years. We are going to see some other developments. Coding is becoming much different now. But if you were to talk to my engineers also in a lot of places, they're going to say, I am not going to use this model, which is only just predictive model based on a lot of data it has been trained on, to write something new or otherwise. I'm going to do some basic scripts. I'm going to do certain documentation, etc., because it raises other such questions as well. I think the way societies respond to previous technological advances, like mechanization, if you see, was to enact a public safety net. There was a shorter work week. We know that the factories had to be worked in a certain way. And also, we will have to understand that people need to be living with dignity as a basic right, even if their skills have been superseded. And with so much of the wealth which is being generated, I'm sure that we can figure those out. But there would be two things. One is to update the society with the new skills which is to be required, and then value the people as people, not just as bundles of skills, because that's just the basic. And also recognizing that something else, EQ, is going to become much more valuable. These models are pretty much capable of ensuring that false information or other such stuff can be injected into the zeitgeist. So the skill of being able to tell what is false or what is fake, etc., that becomes much more important. Like your own example, a letter or a political article, because you are an experienced journalist, you know that that article does not actually say what it should be saying, not only in terms of accuracy, but also in terms of conception of an idea. So those kind of skills become much more valuable. So I think that it's not going to happen as fast as we think. But of course, because if within a few weeks, millions of people who were generally a little scared of technology, but because it's a word prompt based thing, have adopted it, it feels like, oh, everything is going to change.
Yeah,
So,
I think you make an interesting point that, I mean, we do all react perhaps very sort of aggressively when things change, and maybe we're jumping the gun about a lot of things. But like you said about the article, I mean, that brings me to the other point, Apar Gupta, which is about ethical issues. I mean, you mentioned, for instance, biases, etc., susceptible to inaccuracies, biases. But also, aren't there concerns about surveillance? Aren't there concerns about privacy that have also been generated with this? Or are we overthinking that as well?
I think, Nidhi, that's a good question in the sense that we need to also look at technology and the way it is used in the public sector by government. Here, quite often, the arguments which are made either in favor of efficiency, that there are scarce resources with the government, and artificial intelligence is a very efficient way, or it is a better way to do work, which will save money and benefit the public exchequer. You can do the same public program in a way. And what are the promises quite often offered by that technology are firstly not put to proper scrutiny, that whether the technology is actually able to achieve the outcomes. And there are no audits, there's little transparency, which does exist. Now, the example which I can use is one which I referred also in the opening remarks, which are there. This is the use of facial recognition technologies, which also does utilize AI-based models, which are through images which are run to identify people as to whether they are indeed the voter against whom there is an entitlement to, there's a right to cast their vote in a general body, in a state body election. So Telangana did that, and we asked what were the failure rates. What failure rates essentially means is that the model or the camera at that point in time, even if it is Apar Gupta trying to vote against the entry for Apar Gupta, it says that this is not indeed him. So there's a failure which occurs in terms of its recognition of the person who's indeed the person holding that right. And these are kind of exclusion errors which do occur with digital technologies, and artificial intelligence is integrated even in more benign forms by the government. And there's a very good book called Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks, which shows how in sectors of housing in San Francisco, childcare, foster care, okay, and public health services and criminal justice, how AI-based systems result in discrimination because they're built of existing data and contain faults as well, in which they result in exclusions quite often against the people who do not have the resources and are put through these things because the government, the beneficiary of these services, quite often happens to be the poor. The second thing which you indicated, and I'll cover this a little much more quickly, is with respect to surveillance. We need to look at whether this is actually indeed happening at present. So if you look at the Parliament's Committee on Police Modernization, which has come out with reports repetitively indicating that a large part of the police modernization program, in fact, is devoted towards harnessing and utilizing digital technologies, which include CCTVs, facial recognition, creating data lakes also. These are phrases which are mentioned in the report as per responses by each police department, which is going towards the standing committee and saying, we have used this money and we're deploying it towards AI. And what does it mean in very practical terms? Going back to the example I gave initially, if you look at the Delhi Police's 2020 annual report, it's not available online, but I can send a copy if people want. There's a large paragraph how data from different sources and artificial intelligence has been used. The problem, as has been pointed out by people, is that quite often technologies by themselves seem impartial. The machine did it. So there's a veneer of objectivity, which actually becomes evidence, but it is just bias, it is fault, or it is completely incorrect by itself. So I think there's a large amount of risk for the public sector. It needs to adopt these technologies which restrain, especially when they touch upon the rights of individuals. And I think having government committees deliberate on as to any kind of legal regulation is the proper path ahead to mitigate these risks.
So that flows beautifully into the next point on regulation. And I'll ask Mishi to first, just reflect on that. Is it too early for us to be talking about regulation of AI? Is it just too early? Who does it? That's the other thing. I mean, should it be governments only? Does that not set off a whole chain of other issues? If it's a government committee only that looks at regulation, how do you regulate something like this, which, I mean, doesn't really have a national boundary as such? What would you say on that?
Well, some people actually asked ChatGPT whether it should be regulated.
And
the answer was the question of whether the AI models like me should be regulated is a matter for humans to decide. It is important for stakeholders, including the developers, policymakers, and the public, to engage in discussions about ethical implications of AI technologies and develop regulatory frameworks. And then it gives on the frameworks. But I will also say that Microsoft, which reportedly invested billions of dollars in OpenAI and uses GPT-4 in its Bing search engine or whatever, if anyone ever uses Edge browser, and adding it to Excel or Word, they laid off its entire AI ethics team. these were the people who were responsible for making sure that the company's AI is built responsibly. And now we've exposed the business to risk and human beings to risk in doing so. The first thing I'm going to say is, before we even get to the idea of regulation, it used to be, of course, greed drove a lot of this, which it's already doing. Whether it is Meta, whether it is Google, and a host of smaller tech companies are in a haphazard race to build their own language models and AI. And that's why you see, whether it is someday it's Bard, the other day you have Galactica or something else which is coming up. When Bard was asked by Kate Crawford, Bard actually said that it was being trained on Gmail users' private email messages. And then Google quickly redacted about all of that. That tells you already about the harms are based on how these models are being trained, which kind of messages they are taking, whether our own private messages or how we understand our sanctity of communications, that's still sacrosanct or not, that's one part of it. Predictive policing, that we have seen that all around the world, any of these models, because the inequalities of the society are going to be coded into all of these models. Technology cannot solve what society already has broken. So if those models will be trained on those kind of inequalities or harms, they're going to just perpetuate all of those harms. That's why even so, whether it's whatever you think of Musk these days after the great Twitter show, but including him, many of the people did the pause letter. Many of the scientists are saying we need to slow down a little and think about these matters. Earlier, it was mentioned about Timnit, and Timnit was actually trying to make Google much more ethical about it. But the big tech companies are prioritizing profits over safety. And the idea is, you built yours, and this thing is, but look at mine is even bigger than that. That race means there's not going to be slow down and thinking about what harms are going to happen here. Now, with governments, we did see a press release which came out from Government of India that time, just to talk about generative AI. I think it's also important to understand that the development is happening at the geopolitical scale. As you said, something which does not have boundaries, how do you actually regulate it? US is so scared of the fact that, oh my God, China is going to come up with some GPT-5 model. So that's why we must move. And US companies use that as a constant excuse here to say, if we stop, then China is going to take over. And that is used to generate more money. In India, in that press release also, it was said, oh, we are using AI and researching about research and development. But the governments have actually generally failed to do good regulation on any of these technologies. When they come in, as we are watching in India, their most big motivation is A, creation of jobs, and the B is control of the narrative. And that part of how can we control whatever these technologies are doing spells a lot of problems, not only for innovation, but also the creative uses perhaps regular people want to do. Now, in terms of immediate harms, 2024 is going to be general elections. Elections are in India, elections are in the United States also. What is it going to be? The Guardian had a piece about how they are developing policies as how you make out whether there's a fake Guardian article or not. So you can imagine that if we don't do something, come elections, nobody is going to believe anything. And anything they're not going to want to believe, they are going to reject as being AI generated. And that means the civil discourse and the polarization just gets worse all around. Right? So there's not one problem, there are a bunch of problems here. And the guardrails seem to always, if you were to talk to the stakeholder as companies, it's going to be, oh, we are going to lose out on innovation, without realizing that we let social media operate without guardrails for a very long time. And look what that has wrecked the society with. So this time around, there is a reason everybody is saying why we need that. OpenAI, which is Sam Altman's company, the problem there is they came up with a lot of it. Despite its name, it's completely closed. you can't understand what data models it has been trained on. Earlier, we knew that it was both publicly available data and there is some data license from third-party vendors, but we don't know what it's being trained on. We have no idea how they are using any of these issues. Nothing is actually told to us.
If I could interrupt you, there's a question from Anubhav here, and Mishi Chaudhary can take that. Anubhav has said that the Indian government filed Google last year for their wrong practices, especially on privacy issues. So how can we depend on larger corporations who develop such AI? Are they themselves morally and ethically right? So, I mean, that kind of leads into from what you were talking about.
See, the problem here is, and if we are only, everybody's asking smart questions because people are getting smarter about these things as they operate in our lives these days. Government of India still doesn't have even something as a basic thing called Data Protection Act, or whatever you want to call it these days. I don't know what's the new version, Personal Data Protection Bill. We don't have enough safeguards. When data breaches happen, we don't have anything to actually, as a regular person, any kind of recourse is not available to us. Privacy, surveillance, all these issues are intermixed all the time. We just heard about the facial recognition tech in various other places. And that part is never taken seriously. Now, companies who have pretended to be our allies, they would say, oh, we are the free speech wing of the free speech party. But we've also seen when push comes to shove, companies always will fold, no matter how many lawyers or PR people they have. And the problem happens is between governments and companies, mostly companies give away our rights. And we are forced to watch from the sidelines to say, government has the power, companies have the money. It is very hard, that is why, to rely on either of those parties. And that's why people have to demand the fact that government serves us and we are actually the consumers of companies' products. That's why those products should serve us. I'm not going to pretend to say that, oh, there is one stakeholder who one can rely completely on, but we do live in a world where products are going to come up from private companies, and the governments are democratically elected governments who do have the power to regulate us. So we will have to work together. That's why, whether it is AI or anything else, or in terms of regulation, my view always has been put people in the center. If you can think about people protection and people's rights in a simple way, where Nidhi can use whatever new tech is coming and she doesn't have to worry about her privacy, she doesn't have to worry about all the various harms, etc., because a multi-stakeholder group got together and took care of all of those things. That's how technology can work for betterment of humanity, rather than serving either the greed or the fear.
Apar, just wanted to get your thoughts on this, in terms of how you feel about regulation and what mechanisms, can be put in place. How do we do it? Do you agree with Mishi's perspective?
Yes, to a large extent, I do agree. And forgive me, but it may be also something which, we need to consider, given that artificial intelligence by itself is one of the many domains in regulation which India remain completely unregulated. And why it's important for us to understand is that just from a pure economic perspective, if the government's own aim is that out of a $5 trillion target, which is set in terms of an economic size that India has, there's $1 trillion which is contributed by the digital economy by itself. Shouldn't the rules of the road be fairly well defined there? And what I mean by this is that you have key pieces of legislation and regulation which have proceeded in several jurisdictions globally over a period of time, over 15 to 20 years. And the best example of this is data protection. Countries have in fact enacted their second or third versions of data protection laws based on experience of 15 to 20 years at the very least in some countries. And what that shows is that when large amounts of personal data are being gathered in the digital economy, people don't have proper protections. They don't have rights, for instance, to seek correction of the records, to seek deletion of the records. You have a large amount of problems which then occur, for instance, cyber cybercrime, in which their details are used to siphon off their bank accounts, or all kinds of issues occur at a much more downstream impact. The absence of data protection also ends up being something which is made as an argument in terms of in favor of innovation. But innovation by itself does occur when there are data protection regulations which are very clear. In a way, you have a regulator which is independent, rather than seeking ministerial intervention or seeking policies which can be changed as to pick and choosing. And why all of this is important is that if the economic growth, the social impact is not matched by even consideration and very open consideration around these issues, it leads to a failure to govern and direct the direction, like point to direction of that technology, where it should take us, whether it should be in the basis of our constitutional ideals. Now, I'll also take some instances, for instance, what's happening with the ministry, which is looking at developing these kind of regulations, right? Which is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which is the central government ministry. Okay, so it has proposed a personal data protection bill, which is the third version right now. And in fact, if one goes back to 2019, when this government just came in, the first op-ed written by the cabinet minister at that time, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, assured in writing in his own words that it would be passed as law. Yet today, we do not know if it will be introduced in the monsoon session, which is the last session for this government. Second, you have a new telecommunications bill, which is looking to license everything which is used in addition to a telecom network, which means your email service providers, your chat providers, etc. And it's stuck as well. It has a power for internet shutdowns. It has powers for surveillance, which are being codified in a way which are unconstitutional, right? They're not following court judgments. And those surveillance provisions also are becoming much worse. You have regulations by certain which are leading to the exit of VPNs from India to shut down their servers in India. And you have the IT rules, which every year from 2021 have been amended, and the scope has been expanded to increase the power, the ministerial power of the central government. You have absence of regulation, you have absence of clear rules, and you have very high levels of political control. And what this brings us to is that the AI conversation cannot replicate these kind of faults. If it does happen in a way, it is going to tremendously undermine not only the democratic ideals of India, but it's going to actually fetter the full use of this technology in socially beneficial ways, which we want.
Let me take a couple of questions before we wrap this up. There's a question from Roma Thakur, and Mishi Chaudhary, perhaps you can answer this. As a policymaker seeking to apply AI to socioeconomic policies, my goal is to reduce inequalities. Challenges include insufficient data quality, biases, social inequalities in model, lack of infrastructure, potential misuse by political figures. So what should policymakers and analysts prioritize in this context? What would your advice be?
So I think the person who asked the question, and my apology if I don't remember the name or I didn't get
Roma Thakur.
Roma. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thakur, for the question. I think it's a hard question. I will say that world over, at least we are all grappling with what kind of training data sets are fed into these language models, because the output really depends on what we are putting in. And if our dear friend Sunil Ibrahim was here, he would say that what society is already broken, technology can't fix. So that is a problem here. I think in terms of what regulators should be thinking about right now is that we need to pause not the research, but the deployment of these models. The notion that if you're going to deploy it on a wide scale, then you will have to build a safety case for it. For example, we do it in medicine. If we are going to do it, then people have to say this is safe. That's why you do it. So the research should not stop, but the deployment must stop. The regulator needs to also prioritize how is it going to actually impact the real world people out there, whether it is about predictive policing, whether it is about job searches or fake information. Our regulators' response has been the government decides what is fake news or false information. That, of course, is
yeah, very contentious issue.
And that is not really an honest regulatory framework. That is just to say, well, I am the state, trust me, because I know better. The thing is, society is not a growing 3 or 4 year old child who just has to trust the government like their parents about all responsibility. So I will say that as a regulator, we must invest in more research and development, but we must also make it incumbent on the private companies to say that you will have to make a safety case for it. This is safe. This is what you have done. And now it is safe to be deployed in various places. And the government agencies should not be allowed in the name of saying modernization, or we are going to be better about security to say, we are just going to do AI. I see that as a buzzword being used all over every time. And when you go at the ground level, it is very hard for us to even make rules about search and seizure of basic devices. A policeman on street sometimes thinks it's fine to take away my phone, where all my life is, and just go through all of it, whether it is pictures or my bank data or anything within it. In that sense, in the name of modernization, I would really resist for the regulator to say, just throw it as a buzzword. Until we do have any kind of discussions, and I don't have good answers because it's a hard problem. So there's not going to be a simple answer. That's why we are all trying to say, let's pause and think it together.
Yeah, I think we're all just trying to figure it out. We have a couple of questions from Kautilya students. Shivang has a question. Shivang, please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. My question is to Apar, sir. So the large language models, for it to be efficient, it needs to be trained in large set of data, and also so which are inherently prejudiced against the marginalized, as we have listened till now in the session. And also recently we have seen that when Google and Microsoft, they are launching the chat box, there were allegations that they are responding to time, not to the quality. So are we in a kind of catch-22 situation where we also need large amount of data, and the data which are available in internet in the form of Reddit chat and etc. are biased against the marginalized specifically? So how do you see it?
Apar?
Thank you, Shivang. The marginalized quite often are people who I would think lack social or economic power by itself, and they are at the highest risk, not only because the technology by itself may result in discrimination or denial of their legal rights, but the bigger problem, the deeper problem, quite often is that they lack the resources to avail any kind of institutional redress. There are people who are ignored, there are people who are not heard quite often. And which is why I think it's very, very important for us to think through how we use this. For instance, much more recently, wages which are given under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. There has been a change in which not only the payments are being made to Aadhaar-enabled linked bank accounts, ADAS, but it also for the authentication of the laborer who's guaranteed 100 days of work and then can get wages under that. The process of ensuring attendance is being done through clicking their picture on a smartphone and then uploading it on an app. What has subsequently been discovered is that, now leave aside the questions of their privacy, their protection, their dignity, because you're taking a picture of a person every day, right? Making them stand in a line as a form of attendance in order that they can get the legally entitled payment. Leave that aside for a second, just for a second. The app by itself is not working. The people are reporting because they're in rural parts, they're in districts. Quite often the battery is not fully charged on the supervisor. They are not able to mark their attendance. And what is the impact of that? They can't get the wage which is guaranteed to them. And What I foresee is that the use of technology, especially AI-based technology, which almost seems like magic, which almost offers this promise of great efficiency, progress, also colors society's views and dulls its critical senses, which means that we take whatever we get from it and we treat it as the objective truth. What that often results is deeper discrimination, structural discrimination, which is reinforced by technology. And think about one other use case, which I'll use here. In fact, I draw it from Timnit's paper only, which is that, for instance, large language models, which you are using, quite often rely on pre-existing language, which has been used, primarily the English language, and how it is being used in a way which is correct and incorrect as per rules of grammar, as well as rules of countries. It is not illegal in a way, right? So the determination quite often, which is being used here in a large language model, is on the basis of decisions which have been taken in the past. Okay, and those decisions may also not be accurate. But large language models and AI-based content moderation is a reality on social media today. So quite often, AI-based content moderation, which is being claimed by Meta, specifically with respect to Facebook or Instagram, results in content moderation decisions which you do not understand. When you appeal that, your appeal is decided in 90 seconds, again, by an AI. There is no transparency how the model has been built, what data has fed into it, and there is no regulatory oversight of how this is being done. This is impacting people's free speech and expression without any transparency, deepening the problems of bias in social media and content moderation at a system level, not at an individual level. And what I'd like to say and bring this example a little close is, for instance, in protest movements, the farm protest movements or the wrestlers protest movements which are being done today, a lot of the speech may be flagged by these large language models, because quite often movements also result in fresh language, in new use of words. They may not be abusive. They may be a repetition of something, in fact, disagreeing with it, which may not be permitted on a platform. In fact, we have one example, at least on Twitter, in which Sanjay Hegde, who's a senior advocate, whose header picture, which was of the Nazi protester, was utilized as a content moderation system to flag and restrict his account. Now think if that happens on a system level. And that is the problem with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for just one more question. Indranuj, are you there? Please go ahead.
Hi, a lot of great conversations. I was just going through in parallel the news of Vice President of US going to meet the top CEOs of the big techs on AI. I think my question was particularly on the regulation side, but I think both Mishi and Apar quite well, sort of briefed us on that. Yeah, but just further on going into that, I think Mr. Vaishnav, he recently said that there's no going to be like a fast-paced approach on bringing out some sort of regulations any sooner, because they just want to scope how big it becomes, how it can sort of innovate in India. But I just want to add one question, is like, which might be a cliche question and repetitive sort of, is the jurisdictional overlap that might come around, because this is an example I'm saying. I think
sorry, Indranuj, can you come to the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the Telecommunication Engineering Center, TEC, they are also working on AI-based standards and rules. And again, we are talking about regulations and again coming around. So what kind of jurisdictional overlap can we see around those on the regulations front? And also my second question is
one question, please. One question. I'll let Apar take that, or Mishi, whoever would like to. Apar, would you like to go ahead?
I'll prefer Mishi takes this.
Okay.
And follow her.
Yeah.
Well, he prefers it because he's covered it already, and a lot of portions of it. So, but I think Apar did go in detail about several of these things. Jurisdictionally, I think everybody is grappling with the fact about the deployment as well as the research and development and the benefits it can bring to various countries. The United States has always tried to use the large platform companies as part of its foreign policy and industrial policy. So we have to recognize that fact. that their geopolitics does have an impact of how they are going to regulate it. European Union generally is much better at regulatory structures, not as good about innovation and coming up with companies who will be able to cater to a large scale market. Then there's, of course, the Chinese models. Now, here, I think a lot of people, European Union is already coming up with at least a draft AI Act where they would like to actually ban certain harmful real-time things like real-time facial recognition tech, etc., just as harmful AI and not allow them at all. US, at least California, has come up with workers' protection laws through the NDAs, because a lot of times the first line of defense are the people who are working on these technologies within these companies, whether it is Timnit resigning because ethics are not there, or Jeffrey Hinton suddenly realizing that this is becoming much bigger. We also see these are the people who are the first line of defense, and they have to be protected by law, whether it's because a lot of times they are bound by NDAs, confidentiality agreements, and they cannot actually say anything about these issues. That's one granular form of regulation before we decide to do something which is bigger. And there is a big call, at least globally, to say that although we don't make treaties anymore because they don't really work in the same way as in the 1990s they used to, and countries want to have their own kind of national jurisdictional basis as well. But people are still talking about that this is much bigger than each country on its own, and there needs to be an international discussion on these technologies. On India, I will say, when the entire world, including certain companies like IBM, like Microsoft, and several cities in Europe or in the United States are halting facial recognition tech, India is moving on this march of, we are going to have CCTVs everywhere, we are going to have facial recognition tech, and the ministers are accepting in the parliament how they are using it to, using the tech to identify protesters. I think that tells us a lot about, in this vacuum of no regulation, where people don't get to participate, the governments want to control all the power and tell us that this is going to be great for economy and not really account for the harms. And that's the direction regulation needs to move on.
I think this has been a super conversation with the two of you, Mishi Chaudhary and Apar Gupta, because it's given us a really sort of deep look at this world of artificial intelligence. It's not like you said, Mishi, earlier, right at the beginning, it's not a binary. It is a very complex issue. It's exciting, but you've also struck notes of caution that perhaps governments would be looking at in the months and years ahead. Thank you so much for joining us at Kautilya today, and thank you to the participants. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome, Nidhi. Thank you for having us.
Good to see you both. Bye.
Thank you for having us, and also the entire team of Kautilya.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.